Hi, everyone. I am Lynda Cheldelin Fell, and this is Moments of Hope with the International Grief Institute. According to the CDC, the impact of grief in the workplace costs corporate America how much every year? The answer at the end of the show. So today we are talking with an expert guest who is a former banking executive. He went on to create the Widower Support Network. He's authored a book. He has a wealth of experience to share with us tonight. So welcome to the show, Herb Knoll. Hi, Herb.
Well, thank you very much.
It's good to have you here. So take us back to that pivotal moment in your life when you lost your beloved wife, Michelle. It was 2008. What happened?
Michelle was actually diagnosed on her 49th birthday, and she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So for 39 months, she fought a good fight. Heavy surgery, chemo, radiation, all the trappings were there. Sadly, as a husband and caregiver, I had to watch her go from a size 8 to a 6 to a 4 to a 2 to a 0. But she was very brave, and throughout her journey, she always was concerned about other people. She would sit at Vanderbilt's medical center with me and say things like, well, I had good insurance, or we have good insurance, and we have good employment at the bank that I worked for. We have resources, we have friends, we have neighbors who are there for us. What about that poor person over there? Who's helping them? And that really crystallized for me at the time the need for me to do more for my fellow man going forward. I lost Michelle. It'll be 10 years this March of this year, 2018, after 39 months, and we were residing in San Antonio, Texas at the time of her passing. Shortly following Michelle's passing, I sensed that I needed some help. I was dealing with a lot of stuff at the time, my own grief, certainly. So I went looking for help. And among the places that I went was a Barnes & Noble bookstore. And I walked in, I asked the gentleman behind the counter, what do you have for a new widower? Well, this gentleman was very nice. He typed widower into his computer search engine. He slowly then looked up at me and said, Mister, I don't have a damn thing for you.
Wow.
And so by the time I left that store, I realized my life just took a major turn, and I wasn't going to let that continue where men did not have resources to turn to. Within a year, I left my employment, and I dedicated my life to serving widowed men, their families, their loved ones, and even the ladies who date them, who are trying to understand them, in dealing with all the issues that they have to deal with. And there are many. Some of them not so obvious, but from dating to finances to grief to their spiritual life, their relationships with the former in-laws, their relationships with new people that may enter their life, raising children, their employment, their career, what's that all about? A lot of men become apathetic. There's many, many issues.
Wow.
So I took 9 years to research it, and am now able to mentor and help men and their families and loved ones.
Okay, wonderful. Well, you were a bank executive, a high-level bank executive at the time that you lost Michelle.
Right.
And take us back to what it was like when you returned to work. How many days, weeks, or months did you take off after her passing to the time you went back to work? And what was that like?
I went back after 10 days.
Okay.
She died on a Friday, and I went back to work a week from the following Monday, 10 days later. Michelle's death was anticipated given her condition. So you actually go through a lot of grieving even before the passing. But coming back to work, I would say my staff was very sympathetic to my needs and my grief and did what they could to help me. It's also very strange, some of the things that happened. One colleague walked up to me my first week back and asked a lot of probing questions about me and my life. And then she said, I want to introduce you to my aunt.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, well, that's not going to happen. And I walked away. And I realized, looking back at it, that she was well-intentioned.
Right.
But it just wasn't what I needed to hear within days of my wife's passing. In fact, her memorial service had not even taken place yet. But going back to work was different. And it was different for a variety of reasons, not least of which is during the time of my wife's grief, or my wife's illness, I received a phone call from the CEO of my company, and he was my direct superior. I was a direct report of his. And he informed me one night that he needed to make a change in how certain functions within the company were reporting up to him or up to me. And he hired another officer from another competing bank and brought him in and had some of my duties report to him. Frankly, I don't blame him for doing that. Corporations have responsibilities that they have to meet, both to the shareholders, to the regulators, to their customers. And I was certainly distracted during my wife's illness. But what surprised me is the way that my staff responded to the change in reporting lines. They did not like that whatsoever. More importantly, they didn't even like how I was being treated or maybe even the lack of support that some of them thought that I should have been receiving. As an example, there was a gentleman by the name of Enrique Lerma. Enrique is a terrific man, and he headed up one of the departments that reported to me. In fact, I'd like to read for you, if I could, a few paragraphs from my book. If you go to page 85 of my book, The Widower's Journey, we offer a few of Enrique's comments. He says, I liked Herb from the beginning. He had a great attitude. Every time Herb talked about Michelle, his face would light up. He was madly in love with her. She was the air that he breathed. She was already sick when I first met Herb, but I think he did his best to remain positive throughout. Toward the end, when he knew there wasn't much time left, I could tell he was getting a little sadder with each day. He's typically a very high-spirited guy, and up to that point, he was still very positive. Toward the end, I could tell it was tearing him apart, but he didn't want Michelle to know. When she died, the difference was like night and day. I wasn't close to him, but when he came back, he was very distant, and I was careful not to approach him too soon after her death. But I could tell many of his fellow executives at the bank didn't seem to care about how he was doing, and I didn't see them even trying to take him to lunch. 90% of the time, the door on Herb's office was closed, but sometimes I could hear sad songs coming from his office, like from the Carpenters. I was hoping his peers would step in, but they didn't. For weeks on end, he didn't come out of his office. Finally, I took a chance, and I decided to knock on his door one night after work, and I told Herb to log off his computer. I was taking him to dinner. Reluctantly, he agreed, and what I thought would be a 2-hour dinner turned into a 3 or 4 hour dinner. 2 bottles of wine turned into 3 or 4, and then 2 desserts. We didn't necessarily talk about Michelle. He talked about how he was so concerned about being a good father to his stepson. And I remember him saying, I'm hurting really bad, Enrique, but if I had to do it all over again, I would. Those are from the words of a colleague of mine. And unfortunately, Enrique wasn't the only one who had feelings like that came to me and expressed them. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't realize that such environments that emerge following the passing of an employee's spouse or family member is damaging to the company's profits. And a lot of corporations just think, well, we'll just refer them over to the EAP program, the Employee Assistance Program, and they'll be fine. That's not enough. And there's a wonderful opportunity laying out there for corporations who learn quickly that dealing with grief in the workplace is a good investment. It's good business.
Boy, that's very true. You know, according to the Grief Index study, 85% of managers who return to work after a loss of a loved one report that their decision-making skills are fair to very poor. And I think that is something that, corporate America, they haven't put two and two together yet. Because in the aftermath of loss, when you're grieving, you have a lot of brain fog that's going on up there. And it's imperceptible to most people because we're often on autopilot, right? And so we look normal. We look like we're functioning, but that brain fog is invisible, to those around us. Also, according to the Grief Index study, 90% of employees suffered on-the-job injuries resulting from reduced concentration. And that's really critical that, those statistics, because after we lost our daughter, I remember for a very long time, and this is just one example, and I'm sure that viewers and yourself have, some form of this in your own experiences. But I remember going through stoplights, being, driving a car and being in such a brain fog that I don't remember whether that stoplight was red or green or what have you. And so you take that and move it into corporate America, and you think about all the ways that the bereaved employee can become a danger to themselves or their coworkers. And I think it's really, really important that they understand the ramifications, because that becomes a risk management issue. So
exactly, that's a tremendous point and a very valid one. I've also experienced throughout my career when somebody would be experiencing a loss in their family or extended family, that the corporations are very quick to talk about, well, who's going to replace them when they're gone? How are we going to get the work done, etc. The question that I want to raise, and I think the International Grief Institute is going to be addressing, is why can't you do both? Why can't you address the needs of the corporation and their obligations, their routine functions, as well as the needs of the staff who brought the profits to you to begin with? Because when you lose a good employee, you lose more than one. You lose multiples. And while you lose multiples, what's happening as a result of that? You have unfulfilled tasks being performed. You have expenses that you're going to incur from recruiters, perhaps. Then for every person that you hire, you're probably going to interview about a dozen. So you have more expense doing that. Then you have lost opportunity cost. Then you have ramp up or training cost. All of this because a corporation didn't take care of the original problem when it surfaced. I mean, it's just poor management on the part of those companies. It's like a company that I heard about just recently. In fact, Lynda, it may have been you that mentioned it to me, about a woman who was traveling, and she received, a professional woman, she received a phone call that her spouse had passed away suddenly.
Yes.
Is that you that shared that with me?
Yep. It was. Her name is Kristins, and she is the managing editor of Human Resource Executive magazine. And she was in Las Vegas at their corporation's own convention when she got a phone call that her husband was dead in his bed. And she had to have the wherewithal to pull her stuff together, leave this convention that her company was hosting. For anyone who's ever been to a convention, to be on the flip side of that, hosting it is, that's mind-boggling. She had to leave that, get on a plane, go back home. And because she had recently used up all of her leave time caring for her sick father as he passed away from cancer, she had none left. So when her own husband died, she had 3 days. That's all she had. And what happened was she ended up interviewing me for an article about grief in the workplace for the magazine, and it was published about a year ago, actually. And, but her story, sadly enough, her story is only one of many that I've heard for people. It doesn't matter what level they are in the corporation. HR policies remain the same, and it's usually a minimum number of days. And of course, people who have maybe built up sick leave or, vacation leave can tap into that. But what happens when the employee comes back to work? Because the grieving really begins after the funeral.
Right.
It doesn't end with the funeral. And so they've got months ahead of them. And, if an employee is performing poorly at work, usually HR outsources it to, as you said, the Employee Assistance Program. And that's great. But what happens when the employee is at work? And what about all the people who work with that employee? Because grief doesn't stay in the cubicle. It doesn't. And it affects everyone you work with because they're concerned about you. They feel for you. They see that you might be in decision-making, mode because, the superiors aren't aware of that you're in brain fog, and see that, you could probably benefit from a safe room. So when those tears start to well up, you have a place to excuse yourself to go to compose yourself. There's all kinds of strategies that corporations can be doing that they aren't now that would save them so much money. The statistics that I'm going to quote, according to the CDC at the end of the show, is staggering. So you return to work. And how was your superiors? You were a high-level banking executive. At one point, you had 80 banks underneath you. And so how was it? What did HR do for you?
There was, I would say, a distance created between some of my colleagues and myself. But frankly, at that point, knowing what I've learned about widowers and the needs of widowers, it didn't matter to me a whole lot. And frankly, I really can't fault my company for doing what they thought they needed to do on the business side. If I have a criticism, it's why can't they and others be able to address both needs, the business side as well as the human side? And EAP isn't the answer. In fact, it's a lame excuse or response to a much bigger problem. And if I could talk about men for just a second.
Sure.
1 out of 5 men will be widowed. And the challenge that men face that ladies simply don't face to the same extent is the fact that men are taught from the moment that they're able to walk that men should, or boys do not cry. So men hold things in. And in my book, we have Dr. Deborah Carr from the University of Boston, who scientifically clarifies for us and validates for us the fact that the human body can only take so much stress for so long. And after a while, things break down.
Yes, true.
Your anatomy breaks down. And as a result of that, of the 1 or is it, out of the 1 out of 5 men who are going to be widowed, a larger percentage of them are going to commit suicide than married men. Depending on what research you look at, it's either 3 or 4 times greater than the men who are married are going to commit suicide. They're going to do so in short order, within 12 months.
Okay.
65% of people who are widowed, men and women, will experience a life-threatening illness within 12 months.
Wow. On
my first day back to work, upon my return to my now empty home, I collapsed in the driveway. And my stepson pulled in the driveway and found me there and raced me to the nearest hospital. I had developed kidney stones, which the doctors decided it was best to leave them in place for 4 hellish days until they surgically removed them. And kidney stones, in part, are created by stress. So whether there's a correlation between my being a caregiver for 39 months has anything to do with my kidney stones, I don't know. But it is curious, and it does raise an interesting question, whether or not it did have an impact. So these men will hold things in, and our men come back from wars and they don't even talk about them. And they lock themselves up in their house and they say silly things like, "Oh, I'm fine. Leave me alone with my thoughts." Well, they're not fine. They're anything but fine because they're grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Employers need to recognize that that man in that office over there or in that cubicle over there or representing them on the highway in a company car today is grieving while he's driving. He's distracted perhaps while he's driving.
Yeah.
So there's many, many risks, particularly for men, because men don't think that they have permission to grieve.
Very, very powerful, Herb. Thank you. I appreciate that because I think that, it's very important that we talk about this. So what would you like to see corporate America do to better serve bereaved employees? To your mind, what steps could they take, even one or two, that would make a difference?
Okay, well, the first thing that I would like to have corporations do is make it an agenda item for their management meetings. And appoint a czar, an internal czar or secretary of the interior who will be responsible for this. And maybe it's not the human resource director because they have their own self-interest in reporting in certain fashions. Make it an independent body. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be someone in management or an officer. It can be, another employee who's empowered by the leadership of the company to make sure that the company is listening to its people. So I would like to then see focus groups created where a no-holds-barred focus group where employees will have the opportunity to truly express what's on their mind. And in particular, people who have grieved in the past should be in that focus group. And by the way, if any company who's watching this recording, I would invite you to contact the International Grief Institute and let us do the focus group for you. The second item that I'd like to point to is have the members of your staff who've been widowed help them by offering free counseling support with a minimum of 6 months of eligibility. Normally, EAP programs allow you to have 3 meetings with a psychologist. Like I said, it's not enough.
No.
Employers who offer EAP programs need to be sure that they have channels within those support groups for the 6-month period that specialize in both widows and widowers. And the third item I'd like to leave you with today is provide employees suffering from a family loss, be it the loss of a spouse, a child, or a close family member, more than the standard 3 or 4 days bereavement leave or more flexible leave time. Just expense it to the cost of doing business. To do otherwise is to risk a valued employee opting to leave for a more compassionate environment.
Those are all really, really great. And I think, just like you said, if you don't take care of your employee, you risk bringing down company morale. And, corporate culture is a very big thing right now. It's a very big trend. Employers or employees are looking at corporate culture just as much as they are the package, the benefits package and the salary and such, because is it a company that they want to work for? Is it a company that takes care of their employees? And so, corporations that rewrite and update their policies and procedure manuals to employ strategies when an employee, is facing grief. I mean, that's a crisis. And so I think it's really important.
And the employees talk, and they share stories, including their frustrations. And I can tell you about another institution that I worked for, another bank, where it's a national brand that everybody would recognize. And I was instructed to demote one of my employees due to a ridiculous policy. So that matter, unfortunately, did take place. About 2 months later, another vice president came to me and resigned because they said, "I'm not going to be your next victim." So the word was out that a certain policy was going to put people's careers at risk. Frankly, it was a bad policy, but I lost a very good, capable, long-term employee simply because word of mouth was out. So it proves the point that employees certainly talk, and all of us as one-time employees and maybe later on in management, we've all been there. We've all witnessed it.
Yeah. It affects, so many people. So before I reveal that statistic, I want to ask you, tell us about the Widowers Support Network. I mean, when you lost Michelle, you were a banking executive. You retired. You said, I'm done, and you founded a support network for men. Tell us about that.
Yes, I left my career of 38 years and decided that I would be more fulfilled helping men who are suffering, because men are so reluctant to even admit that they need help.
Right.
And my hope was that, having been a widower myself, that they would believe in me and trust in me, and many of them have. So I formed the Widowers Support Network. It was established to comfort and assist widowers and those who love them, regardless of their geographic location. And the best news is I do it for free. Among our services are 3 communication channels filled with helpful information for widowers, as well as their families, support group, and yes, widowed women. In fact, we receive as much favorable comments from women as we do men. Our channels are our website, Facebook, and Twitter. So I should mention that many of the women and family members either follow us on Facebook or Twitter also, and they register on our website so they too can benefit from the valued offerings, not just widowed men. But of our services, we include mentoring and life coaching for widowed men. So I literally take calls in the middle of the night from men I don't know, if necessary, who are in a position where they need to talk to somebody that they can trust and open up with. I do it free of charge. I stay on the phone sometimes for hours with a single conversation. And I'm available to them forever going into the future. If they're within striking distance of my location, I go to their homes. Remembrance. We also do remembrances of deceased spouses for our registered followers annually on our website. So if you go to our Facebook page, you will see how we there post a remembrance of the women who have passed away, who husbands have registered with us, or they were a contributor to my book, The Widower's Journey. Registered members of my website also enjoy the opportunity to post information about their deceased spouse, to sort of tell their story, talk about her, talk about what she was like as a wife, as a woman, as a member of the human race. We also allow registered members to participate on our blog. There, they could even ask questions of our followers anonymously. So if they're a little shy and they have a question that they really need an answer to, and they don't even want to call me and try to get it, they can go on our blog, and we'll be happy to accommodate them there.
Oh, bless you. So what is your Facebook page, and what is your website?
My website is widowerssupportnetwork.com. So it's an S on the end of widowers. That's plural. widowerssupportnetwork.com. And on Facebook, it's simply Widowers Support Network.
Okay.
And
your email?
On Twitter, it's at Widower's Journey.
Oh, I like that. And your email that people can email you?
Yes, please do. It's Herb at widowerssupportnetwork.com. Great.
Thank you. Thank you for, sharing all that information. It's really important work that you do.
Also, if I could, besides my book, which I'd like to show you, which is available on Amazon.com. And by the way, we're going to be translating it to Spanish shortly. But I want to offer this to anybody who writes me. I also created a foundation named after my deceased wife, Michelle. And among the things we did that I'd like to share is what's called the Michelle's Angels Hope Trilogy. And this is the story of 3 extraordinary men who faced insurmountable challenges in their life. I mean, truly, one was a POW in Vietnam for 6 or 7 years, tortured, etc. Another gentleman has had 2 double lung transplants and has lived to talk about it. And there's a third gentleman. And all these gentlemen talk about how they got through the most dark of days in their lives. It's truly remarkable. It's free of charge. I'm happy to send it to you either in paperback, or else I'll send it to you in an e-file.
Oh, you're so giving. That's amazing. Because I think it's really important for people to, have hope, and if they don't have hope, to lean on someone else's hope until they find their own.
Right.
I think, it's restoring hope can be done. I've done it myself. You've done it. And so, it can be done. So thanks so much for being with us tonight, Herb. I really appreciate your insight and your guidance. And I want to say that, can you take a guess at how much money corporate America loses every year because of grief in the workplace? Take a guess.
It depends on how they're measuring it, but I'm sure it's substantial. Go ahead and tell us. According to the CDC, the impact of grief in the workplace costs corporate America over $37 billion every year. Billion. I'm not surprised. That's huge. Yeah.
That's how much corporate America is losing because of not taking care of its employees in a time of crisis.
Yeah.
So that's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Let me just you and Glenn Lord and others who are putting together the International Grief Institute for what you're doing. And this particular program, I'm really proud to be associated with. And I think we're going to be able to help a lot of corporations.
Yeah, it's a new frontier, and it's long overdue. So thanks so much for all that you do, Herb. All right, everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week. Have a good night.
Good night.